I've seen some properties that have given me nightmares at night.
Based on that, do you think that now's a good time to buy or sell?
Economists say that the housing market is at its most unaffordable levels in recent history.
History is repeating itself. Another subprime bubble is about to burst.
Your mortgage is not actually even your biggest cost anymore. Did you see that? It was actually surprising.
No, I did.
You really need to be on top of your game as their representative, or else their life can fall apart. Life can happen for X, Y, and Z reason, and they have to sell. If you're entering into that position, obviously you have the low hand when it comes to negotiating. You're not in a position of power because you're not able to walk away.
Losing $30,000 to $60,000 to the average Joe can be their entire year. It can be your most precious asset. It could also be your most precious nightmare. I've seen properties that maybe a client had bought a few years ago, where because rates are higher now, they've just lost money and they need to sell it. And when they find out how much money they've lost, it's a major blow in a sense. I've seen properties that have had problems that require a certain amount of money to fix that people don't have. I've seen people not be educated in the amount of money it can sometimes require to fix properties.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen basically the dark side of the moon of real estate.
Based on that, do you think that now's a good time to buy or sell?
I think my opinion on that is actually lukewarm. If you attach your buying and selling to mortgage rates, when you go into the high end of things of luxury, a lot of what we deal with, you get out of the rate frenzy because it's all cash. And at the end of the day, when you're buying something with all cash, what matters is if you're getting a good deal or not.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a good deal to be had. And typically the people who have the cash to buy properties in cash, they know how to do their due diligence, and they know how to see if they're getting a good deal or not. They're the most willing, in my opinion, to walk away from something if it doesn't make sense. So they're kind of out of the gravity of the dark side of real estate, I would say, is rich people with a lot of cash. There's always some that can mess up, maybe bite off more than they can actually chew.
Mm-hmm.
But the real dark side I see is in the average Joe or American who has to finance and get money from lenders to acquire a property, and they're not educated enough on what they actually need to know in terms of buying a property, and they're taken advantage of from multiple different angles and taken advantage of by their own lack of education.
So you think that basically what you're saying is that if somebody isn't prepared with educating themselves to enter into the game of real estate, that it could be a very risky endeavor?
Yes.
What about from the seller standpoint?
Well, that was pretty much buyers and sellers that I was hitting on. Both.
What can you say? What's the most serious situation that you've been in since getting into real estate when representing one of your clients?
I guess I could give two examples. One is a property that was bought when rates were low, and now that rates are higher, it's having trouble selling, and it's kind of hurting them that, yeah, you're probably going to have to sell this property lower than what you actually bought it for. And that's a significant chunk of cash too. I mean, that's like losing $30,000 to $60,000, which is, to the average Joe, can be their entire year salary.
Right, because if they don't have the equity to make up that difference, then they have to cover that in cash in order to close the deal.
Yeah. And if you take away the average person's an entire year of salary, that's a blow.
Mm-hmm.
May not be critical, but it's a bad blow.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is one of the big houses that we sold where the client needed the money. It's kind of a happy story because we actually got the deal at where they needed it to be. But it was, I mean, they pretty much, it sold for what they bought it at years ago. And that was actually a good thing. The bad thing is that once again shows that real estate can not always be fairy tale Disney princess heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You can get caught up in a serious situation if you're not prudent.
Yeah, I think that it's a common trope that people say that you're buying your most precious asset by buying your family home, the place that you're going to be hopefully for 10, 15 years if everything goes according to plan. But
let's pick that apart. My most precious asset.
Well, the reason I say that is because the other side of that coin is that some people, when they're purchasing property, they, for whatever reason, life may happen. They have, not very frugal spending habits. They don't have a savings. They're not investing in other assets that are more independent of real estate. But sometimes all of their wealth is held up in the house.
Yeah.
And then life can happen for X, Y, and Z reason, and they have to sell it. Mm-hmm. And then if you're entering into that position, obviously you have the low hand when it comes to negotiating. You're not in the position of power because you're not able to walk away. Like you were saying, somebody with cash would be able to. They're just looking for a good deal. And some of these people, I've had several, like the one you just mentioned, throughout my career, where they essentially had to sell the house and they needed to get a certain amount of money for it. But for whatever reason, if they didn't keep up with the property, if the market took a turn, they were put in a very real life situation where there was a lot riding on the success of the sale. And that's what I think that it can be a bit deceptive with the general aura of real estate today, that you see all these social media posts online from all these different realtors about, I'm so happy for my clients doing this, and they're painting this silly kind of glamorous image about what it is to be a real estate agent. But really, some of these transactions are framed in that this is a very serious matter. Like this is no game. Like you really need to be on top of your game as their representative, or else their life can fall apart. Mm-hmm. I had somebody a couple years ago that was so destitute from everything happened to this person one after another. Their whole life was falling apart. The only thing that could get them over the hump to move on with their life was for us to sell the house. And it was so burdensome at a point that they literally were confiding in me that they were contemplating suicide if it didn't happen. And thank God it did. But there was a period where the market was shifting around 2022 where housing prices had peaked and then buyer demand just fell off the face of the cliff when interest rates started going up. And that was the time period we were entering into the market. It was one of the worst periods to sell. And there was a period where it was pretty serious.
Yeah, like I want to touch the your most precious asset is your home. That's definitely a myth. It can be your most precious asset. It could also be your most precious nightmare.
Oh, 100%.
And yeah, that's a myth bust right there. Is it's not always your most precious. There's other assets that you could buy that could be equally as precious as a home.
Where that comes from, though, is the reality that we looked this up not long ago, that I forget the number, but it was the majority of Americans don't have $10,000 saved in their bank.
Yeah.
And they have zero emergency fund whatsoever, no liquidity. And that they may have been paying their mortgage down for 15 years and calamity strikes. That is your most precious asset then. That's where all of your net worth is being stored in, but it's not a liquid asset. It can take a long time for some of these places to sell. If, like you said, if it is your most precious nightmare and one thing happens after another, the roof goes out, you have a leak, you have termites, you have to fix the plumbing, the AC, all of these are serious, real expenses that can take a heavy blow that you don't recuperate that if you have to put it back into it.
Insurance stays away. They don't cover things that have happened over a long period of time that you may not even see that it's happening.
It's like deferred maintenance.
Water is leaking into your walls, and then you have termites, and it runs up an $80,000 bill. They won't pay any of that because they see that as, well, you should have been looking after your property, basically.
Right, you didn't handle the deferred maintenance to prevent this from happening.
Yeah, but it could have been something that's completely invisible that you didn't even know was happening.
100%.
So insurance really just covers sudden acts of calamity, like a pipe burst, a hurricane, a flood, a fire, stuff like that.
Yeah, and where we are right now in the market, even though inventory is still low, or let me reframe it. Since inventory is still very low, if you're listing a house that's been meticulously kept up, it has all of the modern bells and whistles, cosmetically speaking, it's the right square footage, it's the right condition, the flooring, the kitchen, the layout, all of those things. And if it's in the right neighborhood that people are looking for, and you price it not crazy competitively at the top end of the market, it'll still sell like that. But everything below that, say, top 10% of the market, if you haven't been keeping up with it, say it's a family home that you've lived in for 15 years, it has cracks in the walls that aren't big, you can get away with it. You know, if you're just living there, it's no big deal. But say there's scratches on the floors, the kitchen tile is old, the roof is maybe 8-9 years old, which is perfectly fine, but a lot of insurance companies are more hesitant to cover that. And so if you're not grandfathered into that policy, the buyer is going to walk into that and they're going to get, a ridiculous homeowner's insurance rate from the homeowner. Currently might be paying $5,000, but the buyer gets quoted at 12 or 15. There's all these things that if you aren't constantly investing money into the property, which is a very unspoken of kind of hidden expense, if you're not keeping it up to the top of market standards in today's market, you run a serious risk of not being able to nearly recuperate what you could get out of it, what you should get out of it. And that's something that a lot of people don't really take into account, is that, everything's fine. Why do I need to, redo the whole flooring? Why do I need to gut the kitchen and do all that stuff? Because if something were to occur and you have to sell it, you may not be able to, because buyers are really trying to scalp only the most in-demand items right now.
Yeah, as they should, yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
And then that's not even talking about, we did talk about, but the payment of HOAs, insurance, property taxes, all that on top of the mortgage you're paying. So there's a fine thread, and you need to know what you're doing, or else you could get burned.
And I would add on to that as well. The common trope would be that that's more of like the average home sale throughout the country. You know, the 3-4 bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2,500 square feet. But we've had experience with that in luxury properties as well, that some people haven't been keeping up nearly as much as they should have on the condition of the property. And when life strikes, everything they have is tied up into their real estate, not in any other assets. So it's not just relegated to the middle class and upper middle class. It could be luxury as well.
That's where we come in as professionals to shepherd people and give them good advice, and to not just be all in for the commission, basically, is to give them accurate information and to make sure they don't get themselves in a bind that's unnecessary.
100%, because you're not serving them if you agree to whatever they want to sell it at, which is way above the actual market value, and you don't tell them that just because you want to get the listing and keep them happy. We have a responsibility to kind of have those maybe initially tough conversations to put things into perspective.
And then on the buyer end, to tell them when to actually walk away from buying a property because of said catastrophes or potential catastrophes.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. You may have properties. We've had several this year that people are looking to buy that aesthetically everything looks totally fine, but there's these slightly beneath the surface absolute red flags that they just may be buying, and they usually do purely off of emotion. But it's a serious financial decision to make. That you need to look at it from that. The financial aspect comes first, then the emotion can follow after that. But it has to make sense on paper before it can make sense in your future.